of smoke in the sky again, so I'm getting high again. Take another hit to the diaphragm. I never drew the diagram, how to deal with this shit, so I still and lie again. Whoa.
Well, the summer of 21's officially come to a close, marking the end of the second and hopefully last movie season, at least partially stunted by the COVID-19 pandemic, and I honestly never would have guessed back in May that of the big three I really had my eye on, The Suicide Squad, The Green Knight, and Candyman, which, by the way, I wish you'd all stop calling a Jordan Peele film. It was directed by a woman named Nia DaCosta. The one I'd immediately have to sit down and make a video about would be the comic book movie. We all knew going in, just based on the people involved and the circumstances under which it was made, that this was going to be a pretty fun movie. But what really surprised me is just how much the Suicide Squad has to say for itself, artistically, politically, philosophically even. I love that Starro finally gets its big screen debut. Viola Davis is just bone-chilling as Amanda Waller. I was sold on John Cena seconds after Peacemaker is introduced, right from his first reaction to King Shark. Bullshit! All the characters were great. I loved them all. I loved the tone and the messaging of the film too, and more than anything else, I love that this movie was basically made for spite. Spite is a tremendously underrated emotion. Historically speaking, it's probably the most reliable driver of human creativity. It's the red pepper flakes and the pasta sauce of the artist's life, and that little extra oomph is what made the Suicide Squad work for me even more than the director's previous films, if I'm being honest. In a lot of ways, I feel this movie represents the most ideal, unrestrained version of what Gunn was doing with the Guardians of the Galaxy, and if you look closely, you'll see a lot of the themes from those movies being played with here in a much more direct, visceral fashion. The Suicide Squad is an exploration of damage. Growing up in poverty or with abusive parents, living with chronic pain, or the psychological scars left by a toxic relationship, it's about the way trauma shapes us, informs one's ability or inability to function within a healthy society, and the catharsis that can be found in that shared experience. Even the songs that are used, Folsom Prison Blues, Can't Sleep, the Jim Carroll Band's People Who Died, evoke themes of trauma, damage, and recovery, and how beautifully these things can be expressed. I do not mind the rain sometimes, 'cause that's the only way the roses bloom in my mind. As somebody who's been through a lot of fucked up shit in their life, I always find myself drawn to movies or comics that portray trauma more honestly, I guess. I mean, we've all been through fucked up shit. Life is fucked up shit, as the Buddhists say, but I don't know. I was just exposed to a lot of death at kind of a young age. And there was stuff before that maybe I'll get into someday, but it's all just affected the way I interact with people in a way I wasn't aware of for a very long time. And I'm better now than I once was, a lot better, but I'm also very lucky that I can sort of set my own schedule at the moment with my day job, and that YouTube is only as collaborative a medium as you need it to be, because let me tell you, beneath the sexy voice, the piercing wit, and the enormous penis, your humble narrator is a mess.
Millennials.
I don't know, there's this insidious thing about trauma where it isolates you from the sort of people and places, the support systems you need to have in your life before you can even start to recover, and being isolated or poorly treated for long periods of time rarely makes a person better. This is something I find myself thinking about right from that opening scene with Savant and the bird. Now, a few things are happening here. First, as many of you guessed and has since been confirmed by the director, this is a reference to Savant being in Belle Reve because of Black Canary. Super psyched for that HBO Max series, by the way. Birds of Prey is genuinely one of my favorite comic book movies. But I also feel like this scene says some interesting things about prisons and the way incarceration can turn people crueler, more violent than they were when they went in. You know, you stamp someone with a label that affects their ability to find legitimate employment, then drop them into a high-stress environment for years at a time where they learn to be deceptive and network 24/7 with professional criminals. Prisons, as Petr the Bread Guy Kropotkin famously put it, are universities of crime maintained by the state. Savant doesn't seem to get any sort of thrill or pleasure out of killing the animal, just this sort of dull resentment towards a creature that can fly free where he can't.
But I'll do anything to get out of this hellhole.
Americans preach all this diluted bullshit about being from the land of the free, but we have the largest prison population in the world, and when you compare our recidivism rates to those of similar countries, it's a joke. We have over 500,000 more people locked up than China, and they have 4 times our population, so you tell me which country hates freedom. The best Suicide Squad stories always comment on how fucked up and polluted America's various legal and political institutions are, this sense of how twisted a society has to be to make heroes of its villains. The characterization characterization is probably what I loved most about the movie, everyone feeling like a fully realized person from the moment they walk on screen and start interacting with each other. Like that scene in the trailer where King Shark points at his hand and says, "Hand." That's a very stock dumb guy is dumb joke, but what really sells it, for me at least, is how he leans back and nods at Peacemaker after. That little performative touch that tells you it's very important to him to fit in, that he's insecure about being different and he's consciously trying to cover it up and act like everyone else. It's such a human trait that immediately makes this big dumb shark man relatable to us.
New dumb friends.
There are a lot of lines like this too that basically tell you everything you need to know about a character's psychology without necessarily commenting directly on the character's psychology.
I cherish peace with all my heart. I don't care how many men, women, and children I need to kill to get it.
I think you have a serious case of daddy issues.
I have no issues with how much I love my father.
You don't know half of what I would do, John.
You know, I think the single moment I hated most in the original Suicide Squad, or at least the version we've been allowed to see thus far, was the bit at the end where Harley Quinn yells at the— Oh! Shit, like Harlequin, I get it.
You mess with my friends!
The reason this line bothered me so much is that it basically comes out of nowhere. There's nothing about the way this character's acted throughout that movie that would lead you to believe she'd say or do anything like this. I mean, we comic readers know Harley Quinn has this ride or die personality, but that hasn't been conveyed to us through this movie. In Gunn's movie, we see Harley again and again putting herself on the line to help her teammates, tackling Polka Dot Man out of the way of an explosion, swimming over to help pull the jellyfish off King Shark, dangling out the side of a building that's being sprayed down with machine gun fire to pull Bloodsport to safety. So it makes sense in the end when she's sad about Flag's death because he was the only one willing to do the same for her.
You were gonna save me?
Margot Robbie really does steal the show in every single scene of every single movie in which she plays this character, in my opinion. Yeah, she's standing on Deadpool's shoulders, but part of standing on someone's shoulders means you reach heights they never did. Ryan Reynolds has one tool in his toolbox and he uses it effectively enough, but Margot Robbie and the character she's portraying both have so much more range to play with. She can do sweet, she can do bratty, she can do tragic, she can do badass, she can do scary, funny, horny, sad, heroic. I'm sorry, but Harley Quinn has utterly out-Deadpooled Deadpool by this point. Even down to that fourth wall-breaking stuff they both do. Notice she starts out singing that Louis Prima song while they're shocking her, and then it's playing as background music during her escape. Then, when she leaves the building, we hear it playing within the background, coming from the room with all her animated birds and flowers, like this little bubble of insanity where she got to be unleashed without marring the greater continuity of the story. Also, I think my sexual orientation is I want Margot Robbie to snap my neck with her legs. That whole bloodbath of an escape was incredible, probably the high point of the movie, and another one of those sequences that shows you a lot about who a character is rather than just straight up telling you.
We need a victim, a mind to pry apart and spit in.
Just leave it, mate. She's a rabbit hole. Don't fall in.
Harley Quinn has always been one of my favorite Batman villains, one of my favorite comic book characters in general, really, and I find this is more true than ever since coming back to YouTube, etc.
Hey, you're the asshole no one likes.
See, there's a performative aspect to her character I don't think everyone appreciates. Like, she's smiling and singing while they're electrocuting her, but you can tell that's for the benefit of her captors because she's smiling with her face, but her eyes are saying, "I'm gonna fucking kill you." And then the grin's gone when she's no longer being observed. Then when she's fucking everyone's shit up after, it's with this very, not manic, but nonetheless upbeat energy and a very satisfied, kind of matter-of-fact demeanor that tells us this is a person who A, has a lot of pent-up rage, and B, uses the crazy shtick as a defense mechanism, though not one that's entirely a contrivance either, because, and you can trust me on this, if you live a persona long enough, it eventually does become real. I love when she's in full rampage mode and there are little flowers and cartoon birds erupting out of people's wounds. This was such a cool way of depicting a character that's just operating on a different frequency than those around her. Also, I'm sorry, but was Captain Boomerang also breaking the fourth wall there a little bit?
We're in a butcher's freezer house, surrounded by dead hogs hanging on hooks. Only they don't know it yet.
Leave him alone, Boomer.
That scene where the first team is massacred as a distraction was funny, but it's also accurately reflective of the callous way our government really does sacrifice or disregard the lives of American assets or even civilians for a political agenda that serves dictators and financial oligarchs all over the world. In fact, the first thing most of us probably came away from that opening scene thinking about was the aborted 1961 invasion of Cuba via the Bay of Pigs. Conceived under the administration of Dwight D. Eisenhower following the Castro regime's seizure of property owned by U.S. U.S. business interests in Cuba and carried out under John F. Kennedy, the Bay of Pigs invasion was America's plan to send 1,400 CIA-trained Cuban exiles to land on a beach, fight their way to the capital, remove Castro from power, and replace him with somebody less hostile to the United States. The first part went okay, but after that it was a shit show. U.S. air support either hit the wrong targets or never arrived, and the resistance they encountered was more organized than the invaders were led to believe, probably because this supposedly classified operation was an open secret throughout South Florida in the weeks leading up to the attack, and basically everybody was killed or captured within like 2 days. What followed, codenamed Operation Mongoose, is one of the more shameful chapters our government has been willing to cop to in recent-ish history. Authorized by Robert Kennedy, Operation Mongoose was the CIA's plan to train literal mob hitmen to stage a series of terrorist attacks across Havana and then assassinate Fidel Castro. And it was called Operation Mongoose. I'm honestly surprised how much fun this movie manages to be, with so much of it tied to genuine trauma and real-world atrocities that are carried out with American tax dollars. I mean, you think about that scene where the entire team drops in and wipes out a camp full of allies because they got some bad intel from a satellite, and that this is essentially something that happens in real life all the time. Just a few weeks ago, as of this recording, an American drone deliberately killed an aid worker with a car full of water and 9 civilians, 7 of which were children, the oldest being 16 and the youngest being 3. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Something like 80 to 90% of American drone strikes hit the wrong targets. We've blown up, burned to death, and buried alive thousands of civilians, men, women, children, American teenagers, wedding parties, and also American and European mineral extraction companies can make more money than their Chinese counterparts. This movie is very silly, but it's also very authentic in a lot of ways. The US does assassinate people, and work with dictators, and kill civilians, and sacrifice its own soldiers, and it's never for the grandiose reasons that our government and our media pretend.
I wouldn't take such extreme measures.
Oh, extreme? Oh yeah, a little extreme.
If this mission went more important than you could possibly imagine.
Look at the mid-credit scene with the weasel. Watching this creepy child-killing thing that looks like a cross between a rat and a sexual predator come back to life, then scamper into the woods with this goofy loping run you know is just silly enough to draw children to it. Well, the feelings are mixed, to say the least. Because it's funny, don't get me wrong, but there's also real commentary being made. Like, this is a silly weasel man running into the woods, but it's also basically what's happening in Afghanistan right now with billions of dollars worth of very dangerous equipment that the US military abandoned when they left the country. This is the film pointing out that even after America leaves a war zone, it's not the end of the damage we do, because the shit we brought with us stays behind and causes trouble all on its own. Over 70,000 tanks, trucks, and armored SUVs, 176 artillery pieces, 64,000 heavy machine guns, hundreds of thousands of pistols and assault rifles, 160,000 radios, 16,000 pairs of night vision goggles, and over 150 planes, jets, and attack helicopters, all paid for by your tax dollars and eagerly being snatched up right now by whoever can get to it first. See, US foreign policy is written by politicians whose campaigns are financed by arms manufacturers. So there's basically no motivation to transport all this shit back to American soil and have it stored or disassembled when it's so much more cost effective for your campaign donors to just have new weapons and equipment manufactured for the next war. And of course there's gonna be another war. Just look at all that shit. Somebody's gonna have to deal with it eventually.
And onward goes this thing of ours.
You know, Congress gives the military more money than they ask for when they do the budget. Totally bipartisan too. It's one of those things Republicans and most Democrats are basically hand in hand on. Our military budget for the last year was over $700 billion. The estimated annual cost of ending homelessness? $20 billion. So the next time you drive past a homeless person and get all pissy about their poverty having ruined your day, just remember, they don't have a roof, so your tax dollars could buy an air force for the Taliban.
It's not a toilet seat, it's a beacon of freedom!
This is an interesting line because later, when Peacemaker starts fighting Flag, the representation of this thing he claims to stand for, we see it reflected in his so-called beacon of freedom. Then when Peacemaker kills him, Flag's straddling him over a toilet drain, like the film is saying, no, it's a toilet seat and you're a piece of shit.
Peacemaker. What a joke.
I really liked Peacemaker as a character. Between the earnestness of John Cena's performance, the genuine humanity it reveals beneath the satire, and the way his costume looks like some absolute dog shit a 12-year-old would put together from stuff around the house, I basically found him to be the ideal version of the critique being made, and that last part's important to keep in mind. Peacemaker represents a very specific type of criticism, which, to be done effectively, requires him to look at least a little bit buffoonish at all times. He's not a fascist per se, but he's archetypal of a certain ideal that fascists want to emulate. If you've ever met that guy who owns a K-bar knife that he wears to Walmart and constantly uses Marine jargon despite having never spent a day in the military, you might know what I'm talking about. And people like that don't want to look anything like Peacemaker. They want to look like Bloodsport. Well, they want to dress like Bloodsport. Speaking of, the scene where Bloodsport shoots through Peacemaker's bullet is also really cool because a marksman would prefer Full Metal Jacket rounds over hollow points. Hollow point bullets balloon on impact and break apart, creating larger wounds and shrapnel that bounces around inside the body, so theoretically they're deadlier while also being less likely to go through a wall or something if you miss what you're shooting at and kill your neighbor. But FMJ rounds offer greater penetration, so for all the bravado of their first encounter over who's more accurate, Bloodsport is the one confident his bullets will go where he wants them to. Before we get off the military, one other thing I wanted to address is a lot of people I've seen a tad distracted by the presence of female grunts and soldiers in the Corto Maltese military, as if this were like a political statement or some fantastical story element a step beyond shark men and giant space starfish. You know women are cops and soldiers and shit in real life, right? And it's not like a new thing either. Women fought in the Revolutionary War, the Mexican-American War, the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, the Mexican Revolution, World War I, World War II. They fought in ancient wars, they fight in modern wars. It's always been a thing. Same goes for the receptionist with the giant cans. I really don't think this was ever played as a joke. Some people are just shaped that way. Stop letting it distract you. See, people, mostly men, have always experienced tremendous difficulty coming to terms with the idea of women in combat, and I think there are a lot of often interconflicting reasons for this. There's the classic brand of misogyny that says women belong in the home as caregivers, which isn't exactly underrepresented in certain military circles. There's what you could call the leftist perspective that war is not something we should be engaging in at all, and that actively working to make more combat roles for women represents the kind of counterproductive neoliberalism that wraps warmongering up in a progressive facade. Then there's also a certain type of poorly mothered young man who seems to find the concept of women being more powerful or dangerous than themselves extremely disturbing regardless of context, but let's not make this about him. Personally, I'm uncomfortable with the idea of sending anybody overseas to kill people for lithium and oil extraction, but if we're going to have a military, I think it makes sense to put people where they're going to be the most efficient. Bearing in mind, of course, this is not how the US military currently functions. For reasons previously stated, our military is very much designed to be expensive, not efficient, which is probably why every soldier needs to carry like 80 pounds worth of crap. And the fact is, men, especially those who went through puberty with testosterone in their systems, on average have stronger bones, more powerful muscles, and greater endurance than women. They can carry more, run farther, and are less likely to be injured. This isn't always going to be the case, but it often will be, which is why I don't think it's right, by the way, to have different physical requirements for men and women to do the same physically demanding job. However, what I don't often see brought up when this subject is discussed is that women pretty consistently outperform men on the firing range. Ask anybody who's spent time in the military. Shit, ask somebody who's attended Israeli sniper school. It's a thing. Women have better aim. Remember that scene in Fury Road where Max kept missing with the rifle so Furiosa takes the shot? Well, that's real. So, my proposal is we put people where they're going to be their most efficient. That means men in combat can be the ones breaching doors and changing tires and carrying bodies and shit, and women, who, let's be honest, are also way less likely to rape people at gunpoint and shoot civilians, can be the gun people. Speaking of women shooting people...
Recently, I made a promise to myself that the next time I got a boyfriend, I'd be on the lookout for red flags. And if I saw any, I would do the healthy thing. And I would murder him.
The speech Harley gives after shooting Luna is another one of those moments where the tone will fluctuate between these extreme highs and lows without ever breaking in a way that's a lot more difficult to pull off than I think the layman appreciates. And it does so remaining consistently true to both the character and the general political thesis of the film.
You're a hero to me, as well as to my people.
I think you might get me confused.
Harley Quinn's fire and rebellion in the face of American oppression is something to which my entire country aspires.
Oh.
Remember, Luna wanted Harley because of the anti-authoritarianism associated with her image, so in a way, she was just staying true to what attracted him, because when he starts talking like the American-backed regime that his coup replaced, she gives him what he asked for. I saw some people expressing discomfort with the Harley and Luna subplot, like folks were on Twitter saying he groomed or sexually exploited her, which I mean, I guess technically his goons did literally groom her, but not in the sense of what that expression means. Harley Quinn's in this unfortunate position where she likes to fuck a lot of different people, but her fans are also hypersensitive about who she is and isn't shipped with, which, by the way, seems to be something that happens way more with female characters than males, but that's another video. I get why the various shipping controversies happen, and I don't want to diminish people who might be sensitive about abuse or manipulation, though with respect, I also think the movie makes it pretty clear that Harley does what she wants with Luna right up to putting a hole in him. But I do understand why some fans take some ships personally, especially if they seem indicative of values that conflict with your own or with what's connected you so deeply to these characters. The cool thing about superhero comics, though, and this applies to fan fiction as well, is that characters can be vast in a way that those brought to life by a single creator often aren't. They can be completely different people depending on who's writing them and when, so I really don't think one person's interpretation or expression necessarily has to step on anyone else's. Like, personally, in the year of our Lord 2021, I find pairing Harley and the Joker to be icky. It just spits on everything that's come to make Harley Quinn, to me at least, such a cool character. But it also seems like it's mostly women who ship them now. Women who don't read comics, but still, at the end of the day, it doesn't really hurt me, and it certainly doesn't affect my OTP for the character.
I named him Bruce after that hunky Wayne guy.
Harley and Batman are only a fucked up pairing if you consider her primarily as the Joker's ex. Gauging them as their own individual characters, Harley Quinn and Bruce Wayne complement each other's energies perfectly. Light and dark, silly and dour, colorful and monochromatic. She needs a disciplinarian and he needs a therapist. Now, in the perpetual mid-arc stasis every major comic book character has to be kept in to maintain the endless continuity they all share, I suppose it makes sense for Bruce to be paired with aloof, emotionally unavailable women like Selena Kyle or Talia al Ghul, despite the fact that he very clearly has a massive hole inside of him that he tries to fill with CrossFit cosplay and brutalizing criminals. And here's the thing about Harley Quinn's menagerie. Joker, Deadshot, and Poison Ivy, in addition to being an abuser, a flake, and a hoe, are all villains. And the villain's never trying to settle down. But Ryan, you might say, a hoe is a gardening tool, is it not? An implement of nurturing. And yes, Harley and Ivy are an awesome couple, and environmental terrorism is kind of based, but you're telling me she has to make out with every cop and superhero that tries to stop her? She can't, like, spit on them or shoot spores or something? The hero double standard is so real.
Harley
Wayne guy.
I like the ring of that.
Sad little broken rich boy with fascistic tendencies meets anti-authoritarian sub with abandonment issues. It's a tale as old as time, and look at all the space he has for her pet hyena to run around. It's perfect. And of course, perfection inspires envy, but my ship doesn't have to diminish yours unless you let it, and vice versa. Just because I find Harley and Deadshot to be a very dull pairing, that doesn't mean I'm saying you're wrong for liking stories where they hook up, and you're certainly not wrong for feeling disappointed and not seeing it on the big screen, especially when the footage exists and is just sitting there. I also can't deny some very disturbing implications behind the studio-mandated removal of an interracial kiss from the original Suicide Squad, particularly when you consider the other creative decisions made at the same time, seemingly to remove or diminish the roles of people of color in that movie and in Justice League.
This is good time.
Which I suppose is as good a segue as any into my feelings about the previous film. It's very important to me, when appropriate, to stay positive on this channel. Doesn't mean I'll say something is good when it isn't, or even that I'll avoid talking about how bad something is when I feel I have to, but there is a certain type of media criticism that's become very popular on YouTube I want to avoid. Overall, I just find it more interesting to unpack what I like about something that may have been overlooked than to bloviate into a mic for hours on end about every plot hole, perceived misstep, or thematic inconsistency I can wring from whatever's popular. So it is with some hesitancy that I say, I don't think I've ever unironically enjoyed a David Ayer movie. I'm not saying he's a bad director, he absolutely is not. Fury is one of the sickest looking war movies I've ever seen. I just personally don't find the sorts of films he chooses to make particularly interesting, and ideologically speaking, I do have issues with some of the themes I see expressed in his work and the ways in which they're presented, and I don't think I'm the only one. Look, I've tried giving his movies the Zack Snyder treatment, so to speak, because I'm very aware that the criticisms I have of David Ayer sound a whole lot like what the film bro crowd had to say about Snyder for an irritatingly long time. But with Zack Snyder, once it's pointed out to you, like you go into 300 thinking about propaganda, or you go into Watchmen thinking about 9/11, or you go into Batman v Superman thinking about Watchmen, you really do have to be trying not to see it. And I'm not saying there's no deconstruction in David Ayer's movies. End of Watch opens on this monologue from the protagonist about how cops put people in cages, then later in the movie a drug cartel has a bunch of people locked in a cage and it's treated like the epitome of human evil, but for the most part that movie feels entirely genuine.
So Mr. Big Evil, why do they call you Big Evil?
Because my evil's big.
And I'm not here to talk about how much of a disjointed mess the previous Suicide Squad was, because it's well-trod territory and I don't think I have anything new to add. It was weird. It looked like shit, the Joker was weird, the messaging was weird and all over the place, and the pacing basically what you'd expect from a movie that was hacked apart, reshot, and put back together over like 3 weeks. Also, I feel like every time I remember having enjoyed a Jared Leto performance, it turns out to have been Jake Gyllenhaal, but that's neither here nor there. Here's the thing though. Whatever issues I might have with 2016's Suicide Squad, they ultimately come secondary to the fact that I have not seen the real movie yet. None of us have. And unlike Justice League, the footage for Ayer's Suicide Squad is basically done and just has to be put back together. And it should be made available. I'm not saying I like everything that's supposed to be in it, but a lot of people sacrifice their time to make the movie and they deserve for their work to be seen as much as we deserve to see it. You know, so many of my feelings about comic books and video games, nerd culture in general, over the past 10 years or so have been defined by my anger and disappointment with the community. But the truth is, these stories really did get me through some of the most difficult times in my life, and I've had a lot of difficult times in my life. So I do understand why people feel protective of the material, why corporate meddling with the films is so frustrating, why people take the various shipping dramas so seriously, but it's also why I find it so frustrating when this passion becomes misdirected, when fandom takes what should be a positive experience and uses it as an excuse to spread negativity. Be it the misogynistic, woman-hating shit surrounding Birds of Prey, the body policing over Captain Carter, the passive-aggressive way people drove that Society meme into the ground after Joker came out. And that's not even touching on the chain reaction of interlocking shitstorms that erupt across social media anytime Zack Snyder so much as looks at a comic book property. It doesn't matter that David Ayer and James Gunn have been nothing but supportive of each other's visions. There are still going to be some fans who will use their love of one as a pretext to attack the other. And I think that's such a shame, because not only are fans of the previous film missing out on a really good time if they sleep on this one, they also seem to have blinded themselves to the creative opportunities that can exist even when a project falls apart. To go with the obvious example, this movie almost certainly never would have been made if James Gunn hadn't been temporarily fired from directing the third Guardians of the Galaxy film. I won't go over the sequence of events that led to this because it's been pretty well documented elsewhere, but the trauma of having that project taken away from him and being publicly villainized is all over the Suicide Squad. The themes of the film are all about drawing beauty from ugliness, humor from traumatic situations, and broken, fucked up people finding their place in the world. And at no point does the film feel like it's making excuses for bad behavior or veer off into reactionary tropes about woke scolds or cancel culture ruining everyone's good time. If anything, I feel like the point is made that there are some lines a person can cross after which they just have to go.
I am ready to change!
The conversation around cancel culture is a tricky one because yes, it is a real thing, and there is a very unsettling lynch mob type mentality to the way people will go about it, just poring over every word ever uttered by a creator they claim to hate so they can find exploitable weaknesses or shitty takes. But it's also an extremely over-discussed, often over-exaggerated issue that primarily affects people either in the entertainment industry or otherwise in the public eye in some form. And the people most vulnerable to canceling have always been marginalized creators who rely on support from the sorts of communities that actually care about canceling. So it's really weird when you have some astonishing idiot like Joe Rogan, who is in no way vulnerable to this kind of thing, claiming that gay and trans people are the most vicious supporters of cancel culture, when they are in fact the people most directly vulnerable to it. Somebody like me? Shit, I wish I were popular enough to be canceled. And it's terrible when an artist has their work messed with or taken away. That might even be something I've experienced myself once upon a time, and it sucks. But at the end of the day, I have to be honest, David Ayer and James Gunn and Zack Snyder are all very wealthy men who have already had more freedom to express their artistic visions than most of us will ever get. As a writer, or whatever this is I'm doing, I find it unconscionable the way studios have fucked with these movies. But as somebody who puts the majority of their work out there for free, and some people pay me for it if they want to, I'm not going to deprive myself of a good time over some misplaced sense of loyalty to my favorite filmmaker. It sucks that we probably won't be getting the rest of the Snyderverse, and that an Ayer cut of Suicide Squad still hasn't been released, but after seeing how well this movie came out, what Gunn could do with free reign over a story, unrestrained by the baggage that comes from working under the Disney umbrella, and knowing that it never would have come about had it not been for the Guardians 3 shakeup, how can I not be excited to see what Snyder does with Rebel Moon? Don't you think David Ayer will just put whatever ideas that were supposed to have been expressed in Suicide Squad into whatever he does next?
All in all, I think you're more pretty like this, with all those rotten thoughts emptied from your head.
The Suicide Squad is all about the sort of macabre beauty that can be found in ugliness. The bird-eating savant's face, the close-up shots of all the little rodent feet crawling over a quivering blood sport while Ratcatcher holds him, Harley talking about how much prettier Luna is as a corpse. Everywhere you look, the lines are blurred between pretty and ugly, humor and horror, catharsis and trauma. And nowhere is this more exemplified than in the film's climactic shot, when Harley Quinn uses Javelin's javelin to dive into Starro's eyeball. She's floating there like half an angel and half a mermaid, while this really soft, almost ethereal score is swelling and the rats are swimming all around her, chewing through Starro's optical nerves and crawling inside of its veins, and blood is blossoming everywhere super bright against the viscous eye fluid. It's such a gorgeous scene depicting such a violent death, and it's gross and horrifying and kind of funny and ultimately just really beautiful, and it seems so appropriate that Harley Quinn is the one person able to fully appreciate it. Then it ends on this really humanizing note of pathos for what seemed such a bizarre alien creature.
I was happy, floating, staring at the stars.
I get why a lot of people may have felt a certain sense of disappointment with the film's ending. The reveal under Jotunheim was so dark and symbolic of real atrocities that there's just never any justice for, and the cost of getting the data out was so high, it is disappointing that it only wound up as a bargaining chip and never leaked to the press. That the American government comes out unscathed, mostly. But even this is a degree of wish fulfillment, isn't it? The US government kills people with the push of a button all the time, and nobody ever clocks a drone operator in the back of the head right before they blow somebody's house up. Amanda Waller isn't Darkseid or Thanos or even Magneto. She's America. You can't infinity snap her out of existence, because doing so wouldn't make any more of a difference than bludgeoning a single drone pilot. Because she's part of a system we all facilitate every day. You don't defeat a villain like that with a bullet or a sword or a magic glove, and pretending otherwise for an audience-pleasing ending wouldn't just be dishonest, it would be counterproductive. Because if you come out of the movie feeling all's well that ends well, where is your motivation to go out and make things better? And that's really the thing. We all have damage. We all do damage, whether we want to or not, to ourselves, to each other, to the social compact. Surviving abuse or trauma, living with pain, or being fundamentally different in a way that harms our ability to engage with each other in a healthy way, it can turn you jagged. Make it easier to lead with anger or mistrust, let cynicism rule you. But at the end of the day, do we want to actively foist our damage on others, or use it to help them get perspective on their own? Do we want to make life a better or worse experience for those around us?
I wish I could give that to you.
Don't you worry, eh? I'm gonna get you out of here alive.
I'm going to get you out of here alive.
The Suicide Squad is a movie about broken pieces finding the purpose for the perspective their situation has given them. It's a film that tells you not to dismiss the merits of something that might seem rough or even crude, and it had a lot more to say for itself than I ever would have imagined going in. Thank you for watching. And I'd especially like to thank Il Caesar, Dios, Aaron Black, Crown of Eyes, 4_, Sam Ratliff, Terrence Edwards, Durdia Zugme, Dominic Wiebenseal, David Thomas, Revin Crowley, Francis Foster, and Rakafig for backing me on Patreon. If I've mispronounced any of your names, I'm sorry, just DM me and I'll fix it. If you enjoy my work and would like to pay me for it, like these admirable people, you can do so by visiting patreon.com/wormshole. I don't currently run ads on my videos, so the financial support is really helpful. Now you be good and I'll have some more content for you in a week or so. If you're good.
Starfish is a slang term for a butthole.